Welcome to the 25th webinar in the COVID-19 Ask the Experts webinar series. This webinar will address evidence-based self-care practices that promote wellness and combat stress and burnout. I am Stacy Kalmer-Skalski, and I am NASP Director of Professional Policy and Practice, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. I'm also joined today by Kathy Cowan, NASP Director of Communications, and she'll be listening in and participating in our discussion later in the webinar. Right. So the Ask the Experts webinar series is a collection of recorded webinars posted on the NASP website. They are designed to offer support to school psychologists, interns, practicum students, all practitioners really, as they navigate the delivery of school psych services during our pandemic. Each webinar is free and open to the public. At the conclusion of each webinar, there will be a discussion thread that will be opened on the NASP member exchange. And as a follow-up, any NASP member with questions or a discussion that they would like to continue having with our speaker, with Paula, should go ahead and post their message there. Each webinar will address critical questions emerging as a result of the need to provide psych services during this somewhat strange time that we're experiencing, and will provide some advice and guidance from our expert, as well as strategies and resources for each practitioner while they're engaged in their professional practices. All right, so today our guest is Dr. Paula Gil-Lopez. Paula is the Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Psychological and Educational Consultation. She's the Director of the School Psych Program, also at Fairfield University in Fairfield, Connecticut. She received her PhD in school psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, and she previously worked as a school psychologist in Richmond, California. In 2008, she attended her first mindfulness conference at Georgetown University, and that's where she found her professional and her personal passions. Since then, she's attended many mindfulness trainings, studied the topic extensively, and presented self-care and mindfulness workshops throughout the nation. She's written numerous articles, blogs, and books chapters, and she's participated in many interviews and recorded podcasts on the topics of self-care, stress reduction, and mindfulness. She and her student research team are currently compiling data that investigates and the benefits of practicing self-care and mindfulness for school practitioners, for graduate students, and for the whole school community. So I want to thank Paula for coming today and for participating and sharing your expertise for this webinar. Paula, at the NASP office, what prompted this webinar was that we have been hearing from a lot of our members about how they are feeling burnout, run down, and just feeling an incredible amount of stress from returning to school in person this year. People are talking about the high numbers of kids who are seeking mental health support, the high numbers of referrals to special ed, and kids and staff are just struggling to adjust to the COVID protocols, and really families and faculties overwhelmed, are having feelings of being overwhelmed across the board. We've heard this from all different states. We read it in our social media blogs, and we just know that this is something that we just really felt like we needed to address. So while the return to school is always a time of adjustment and for students and staff, and this year does feel very different to folks, we'd love it if you would take some time and talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing in the field and the extent in which this year is really anything but a normal year for school psychs. So Paula, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Stacy. Yeah, I started presenting self-care workshops in 2016. So there was some interest. I think people really wanted me to teach them how to teach their kids mindfulness. That's why they reached out to me, because they knew that I was trained in MBSR. But I said to them, that's workshop 3. Workshop 1 was self-care. Workshop 2 was mindfulness as self-care. And then if they wanted, I would teach them how to teach their kids mindfulness. But I said, if they got workshops 1 and 2, then the kids wouldn't need workshop 3, because the kids would be getting it. if the adults were taking care of themselves and being present in the moment and self-regulated, then that trickles down and the kids get that. So that was 2016. Fast forward to 2020, March of 2020, when everything shut down. Another hat I wear is as the chair of the Connecticut School Safety and Crisis Response Committee. And I started getting lots and lots of requests for, please present on crisis and what do we have to be careful about and what do we have to look at. And I would always tag on a piece on self-care, because the way I got into self-care in the first place was through crisis care for the caregivers. And so it was never more important than it has been. And I have never given as many workshops as I have been. So I see the silver lining as something that I was sort of sounding the alarm about myself individually. And since March of 2020, I didn't have to do that anymore. People were really recognizing that they needed to do something differently, and they needed to take care of themselves. And I think we can even see some people self-care these days is leaving the profession. Some people are saying, what do I really need to take care of myself? And that's not to work in schools right now, or early retirement. So I think that there is a huge, I think that there, and I go into that in a few slides, but I think that there is a huge recognition that self-care is important. Otherwise, we're going to lose many people, and we already have lost some. And the fact that we've lost some makes it harder for the people who are staying, and because people are doing more with less, and that's the definition of having open positions. But I am really very validated, and I'm encouraged by the fact that you reached out to me, and I'm encouraged at the fact that there are other people reaching out. I just presented a self-care workshop for nurses in Westport, and so they're another group that they're always, these are stressful jobs to begin with, as everyone knows, but then you overlay pandemic and it just becomes untenable in some ways. But the next workshop that I'm going to be doing in December, I was really excited about because it's for principals. And ordinarily, I'll be called in and the administrator will say, okay, here's the PD, here's our IT person. And then they'll say, okay, I'll check in with you. And I'll say, you need to stay. Why don't you stay? You're the person who really needs to hear this. So when somebody reached out to me to present to the principals in Connecticut, I was very excited because I feel like we can work obviously from the ground up, but it's a lot easier when it's sanctioned at the top. So that's a little bit of what's happening in Connecticut, and I know that it's not that different across the country, as you said, Stacy. So I'm going to begin, and so I'm going to start the way I start with my workshops, and so Stacy and Kathy, if you will indulge me, I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes or lower your gaze, soften your gaze. And I'm going to ask you right now just to take a little dive in and find a word that describes how you're feeling in this moment. It could be an emotion, it could be a body sensation, it could be a thought that's meeting you here in this moment. So just take a few seconds. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you have the word. So with your eyes still closed, I'm going to lead you through 3 deep breaths. On my count, inhale, exhale. All right. And so get all the air out, exhale. And inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last time, inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now you can breathe regularly. And I just want you once again to take a little dive in, take a pulse, and find one word that describes how you're feeling in the moment. Might be the same word, could be a different word. And when you have that word, you can open your eyes. Okay. And I won't ask you to share unless you want to.
I'm okay with it.
Okay. All right.
I'd be curious what Kathy chose too. But I picked engaged, which is no big surprise when you're running a webinar. Let's hope the moderator is engaged. Yeah. And then I actually felt refreshed by doing the deep breathing. So that was the word I selected as my second word.
Okay. Kathy, do you want to share?
Sure. So my word is anxious. My first word was anxious. Because they started doing leaf collection outside with the big leaf thing. It was really noisy and I couldn't, but metaphorically, sometimes I feel like that's the noise you hear in your head and you can't actually separate. It was very, so contextually in this moment, it was very hard for me to turn off the noise.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily the leaf blower seems to have moved down the street. So, but for me personally, I have a lot of difficulty turning off the noise in my head to separate from that, to actually do I would probably have to do 20 deep breaths.
So did you have the same word? Were you still anxious?
I did, because I was still anxious because they were still out there.
You know what? And no judgment, no judgment. What that exercise does, and that's like a very simple but elegant, I think, act of self-care, because it connects you mind, body, and spirit. Right? Your mind, you're asking your mind to come in and find a word, and it could be in your heart, it could be in your head, and then you're breathing, you bring the body into it, and then you bring your mind back in. So it's connecting mind, body, and spirit. And two things, self-care to me is all about the brain. It begins in the brain. And then the second thing is that, and Kathy, I love that you said that, because one size doesn't fit all, so for you, you may have to take 20 deep breaths, or you may have to do something else. Maybe you want to do mindful movement, or maybe you want to watch a funny video, whatever it is. It's not something that you can say, okay, everybody's going to practice self-care. Let's do this. So I want to start with my definition, but I also want to say, this is the definition that I use for my research. So self-care is the intentional, proactive pursuit of integrated wellness, balancing mind, body, and spirit personally and professionally. So that means that you do it intentionally, you do it on purpose, you plan it. It means that you do it before you need it. You want to integrate it and embed it in your day-to-day. And you want to do it so that you touch upon your whole person, right? So your body, mind, and spirit. And most people will say, yeah, no, I'm a workoutaholic, but I never read a book, or, I don't practice gratitude. So getting balanced is really important too. And then I have two caveats. One person's self-care should not be at the expense of another's self-care. And especially in schools when you're working as a team, and you have someone say, oh, I'm taking a mental health day. And that's the day that we have these contentious parents coming in with their advocates and their lawyers, and you're one person short. So that's not, that person's self-care is really impinging on the rest of the team. And then lastly, like I said before, if it feels stressful, it's not self-care. Then you have to find something else that's going to give you a sense of relief. So because I think stress is inevitable, right now we're in stress on steroids, right? But stress is inevitable. As soon as we open our eyes in the morning and we go from horizontal to vertical, our bodies are stressed in a different way. So it's inevitable. We're always going to have stress. It's how we manage stress that determines whether or not it's going to have a negative effect on us. So when we practice self-care, we want to take that into consideration. There are two types of self-care. One is temporary. And again, like I said, self-care comes and originates in the brain. The temporary self-care is when feel-good neurotransmitters or hormones, oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, they are released in our bodies, and those are feel-good hormones. We feel close to somebody, we feel energized, we feel happy. But then once they're released and the self-care event is over, they subside. The secondary type of self-care is enduring self-care. And that always has a mindfulness component to it. And what that self-care does is that it permanently strengthens the neurological functioning by actually changing the neural structure of the brain. And so that's the mindfulness component. And Richie Davidson, who was actually my first ever Psych 101 professor, he's now at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's a neuropsychologist. And he's done a couple of research studies that are seminal with self-care. And it's only been about 10 years that we have the technology to measure the brain waves and to actually get a picture. The functional magnetic resonance imaging is only not that long in existence. But what he did was he hooked up the brains of Buddhist monks who had been practicing mindfulness for 30 or more years. And he actually found from the resonance, the pictures that he got, that their prefrontal cortex, it was thicker. There was more mass there than the normal brain. And so that's where we get the notion of neuroplasticity. That's where we get the notion of being able to exercise the brain, which isn't a muscle, it's an organ, but you can do that in the same way and build that part of the brain. And that allows us to have more choice in how we respond to stress than we would if we didn't, because it helps us with our amygdala. It helps us shut down our amygdala. So the other thing I wanted to say is that self-care is not easy. It's not always easy. You know, sometimes it is, like when you go to Hawaii, but even getting there may not be easy. But a conversation with a difficult colleague or friend who's become more of a drain than a support, you know, that's self-care. To have that conversation to try to salvage the relationship or say, you know, we're going to take a break, that's self-care. And that doesn't, you know, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel like a trip to Hawaii. Or pushing back by setting boundaries at work or with a supervisor. You know, that is not easy, but that could be one of the most effective and important acts of self-care in this moment now, by setting boundaries. So self-care isn't always easy. So we can switch the slide now. So why practice self-care? And when I started with my workshops, I used a three-pronged argument for practicing self-care. And I did that to try to persuade people. Like I said in the very beginning, people didn't necessarily want to practice self-care. They wanted to just teach the kids how to be better behaved. So, you know, my three-pronged argument includes ethics, do no harm, burnout, try not to get there. So take care of yourself before you are burnt out. And then to provide a model of self-regulated presence for the kids. And that again touches upon the neuropsychology of self-care and mindfulness. So those are the three areas. So I wanted to go back to Richie Davidson for a minute, and what he has done with the Buddhist monks. He's also done with people who have done the 8-week MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction program with John Kabat-Zinn. And he has found increases in the prefrontal cortex after just 8 weeks in participants. So it's not, you don't have to be practicing, you know, it goes back to our idea before, you know, you don't have enough time to eat lunch. How are you going to practice mindfulness or practice self-care? So it doesn't take a lot. And I also wanted to share that the exercise that you did before, when I asked you to find a word, that was part of a study that Richie Davidson did with students. And he elicited, he gave them a strong emotional trigger, like that would elicit anger or fear or surprise. And they were all hooked up and their amygdalas would be going off. They would be lighting up. And then he instructed them, find a word that describes how you're feeling in this moment. And immediately the amygdala shut down, the prefrontal cortex lit up. And they did that because they were in their prefrontal cortex looking for a word. So in that way, when your prefrontal cortex is working, your amygdala is not working. So when your amygdala is online, fight, flight, or freeze, your prefrontal cortex is not. And so that's why it's very hard to make responsible decisions when your amygdala is going a mile a minute. But as soon as you turn on your amygdala, your prefrontal cortex, your amygdala shuts down. And so as the significance is, as a mindfulness practitioner, your prefrontal cortex gets stronger, and it actually allots 3 to 8 seconds of time to make a decision. When you get a strong emotional trigger, if you have a stronger prefrontal cortex, it gives you 3 to 8 seconds to decide how you're going to respond to that strong emotional trigger, rather than just react and go up that emotional mountain and blow up or whatever. So in a nutshell, the mindfulness, which is part of the enduring self-care, helps us to respond by choice rather than just react and have to say we're sorry down the line. So that's my little neuropsych piece in there. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we are in a crisis. I think that many people would prefer or expected us not to be in a crisis anymore, but we still are. And a typical crisis has a beginning, a middle, and end. You know, we have the beginning, and then we're in it, and then it's over. And there's usually a clear population of victims, survivors, and we are more likely to know who may have a traumatic response, or it's enough of a small population that we can monitor more carefully to see, you know, long-term effects. But here we are in a pandemic, and what are we doing? We're going on year 2, right? We're coming up. and we can't predict the future. We're hoping, I mean, we're more hopeful. And I think that's why people started the school year being more hopeful. And then with the shortage of help and, you know, trying to get back to business as usual, it's not working that well. So in a pandemic, we're all vulnerable and we're all experiencing loss or grief, whether it's people that we've lost or normalcy that we've lost. So you can go to the next slide. So what is really important to understand is that we are all first responders, and we know that about school psychologists, all first responders, but we're also victims in this crisis. And we have one foot in both camps. And so we have to understand that because we have to make adjustments. And then we also have to recognize that in ourselves. If we have pre-existing conditions, we really have to watch out. And then the same as with other people. Okay, so you can move along there. I think that's one of the reasons why I think that we really need to practice extraordinary self-care. You know, self-care is something that sounds nice when you have time, but it's an imperative. I don't think we can ignore it right now. And so caring for the caregivers, like I said before, that was something that I was always interested because of my interest in crisis. And I think most school psychologists know that in a crisis, you have to watch out and you have to monitor your colleagues, yourself. But in the self-care continuum, this is not where we want to be. You know, we don't want to already be experiencing symptoms before we start practicing self-care. So going back to the definition, self-care is the intentional proactive pursuit. So instead of getting where we're actually exhibiting symptoms, we want to be making daily choices so that we can be the best that we can be for those we serve. So you can go to the next slide. The importance of self-care for school psychologists cannot be understated. There is a recognition that those people who work in the mental health field have very high burnout rates because it's stressful. You're helping other people with their stress, and there's that emotional contagion and compassion fatigue. But also Scott Hubner, who I think was way ahead of his time with this self-care, he found in a study that school psychologists have the highest burnout rates among the helping professions. So that means that school psychologists are extra vulnerable, and as a result, it's extra important for us to practice self-care. So you can advance the slide. Thank you, Stacy. So Christina Maslach, who was at Berkeley when I was at Berkeley, she was a professor. She has the most, I think, studied and accepted definition of burnout, of occupational burnout. And she talks about it as a syndrome of emotional exhaustion. And emotional exhaustion happens when the work demands exceed the resources, the personal resources. And we were just talking about that. There are fewer resources in the form of people and in the form of energy, you know, and there's more required of people in the schools. So emotional exhaustion right now is probably doing pretty well. I mean, it's something that many people can relate to. Depersonalization happens when you see people not as people, but more as problems. So you don't see people as people. So you're helping, and I think people have had, you know, bad days where somebody comes in their office and they don't see the person, they see a problem, you know, and so that's that's one of the components of burnout. And then the last one is reduced personal accomplishment. And that's just feeling like you just can't make a difference, like you just can't get ahead. So I think when I do my workshops, people can really relate to this. They always have been working in schools, but I think now it's even worse. So it really, the bottom quote, it represents an erosion in values, dignity, and spirit. So it's not a good thing. And we have to, as much as is possible, protect ourselves against it. The other thing that's kind of we have to watch out for is that younger, less experienced school psychologists, they report more emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced professional accomplishment. So, you know, we're having people retire early. We don't want our younger, newer school psychologists also to go that route before they even get started. You can advance it, Stacy. So again, Scott Hubner and his colleagues developed this risk resiliency model of burnout. And these are the protective factors, and they're protective factors in the organization, but they're also individual factors that people exhibit who have more of a resistance to burnout. And if you look halfway down, there's a commitment to personal self-care. That's Scott back in 2002. So I just wanted to point that out. He was way ahead of his time. And that's something that he has identified as being able to protect against burnout. You can move it. So this is the ADKAR model for system change. When I back in 2015, when I was seeing my students kind of really struggling in their first few years as school psychologists, and then my colleagues who were in the field, I really thought about how can I felt like mindfulness, self-care was something that could really help people. And so I decided to design my workshops and design this sort of like self-care campaign according to a system change model. And I want to bring this up because I think that this is something that people can do at the grassroots in schools. And the beauty of this model is that they believe, Hyatt and Creasy, they believe that change comes through individuals. You know, so whether it's people at the top, which is, you know, sometimes easier, but it's also people from the bottom up. And so the first step is to raise the awareness for change. And I think, as I mentioned before, the zeitgeist is right. I think people realize and recognize that there is a need to practice self-care. And we're such a self-sacrificial profession, and everyone else is first. And I'm not saying everyone, there's definitely varied abilities to take care of yourself, but what I find is that people in the helping professions will put others before themselves almost every time. So we do know that we have an awareness that there is a need to change that. And I think there's a desire to change because people are dropping like flies. So I think that the first two steps are kind of part of the environment, part of the landscape right now in schools. And then the third step is to provide knowledge on how to change. And so that's how I developed my workshops, to help people know what it was they could do. And not only what it was they could do, but also the benefits. And that would also incentivize them. And then develop that ability to change, give them lots of experiential practice, doing different self-care strategies, and then reinforcing that change by having them create their own self-care plans. Okay. Okay, we can switch it. Okay, so when I talk about my workshops, I developed these workshops. They were 2 3-hour workshops. 6 to 8 weeks apart. And you see at the bottom, Kimberly Sheehan, who's one of my former students, and I were writing up this data. COVID hit and kind of, I think, Stacey, you and I were talking about, kind of put everything on the back burner. But we are looking for a place to publish right now. So we had over 300 participants, but with our pre-post data matching, we only got 66. And so these were professional developments that I did in different districts. So it was very much a scholarship of engagement kind of setup. And I was actually very surprised that we got so many significant results, but we did. So our post-workshop participants reported that they were practicing more self-care, psychological, spiritual, and balanced self-care. So keeping more of a balance at work, between work and home, and personal and professional and family. And then they reported also a better sense of self-efficacy when working with students. So they were better able to manage their time with students, the students' behaviors, keeping them engaged after, or at least it was reported right after. So it was like 6 to 8 weeks after the first workshop, then they got the second workshop, and then they completed the post measures. And then the other thing was cognitive reappraisal in terms of their emotional regulation, and that was better too. And that's really perspective taking. That's the ability to find the silver linings. That's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, so that you can have better compassion. And then the last one was observing mindfulness. So these were the areas that our participants reported that they did more of, presumably as a result of or correlated with the workshops. So, I did take measures on burnout and we didn't find anything, but we didn't use Maslach's burnout inventory, which is sort of the gold standard, because we didn't have any money. So we used a different burnout inventory. But even though there were no significant effects found for burnout, the increases in the sense of efficacy and the cognitive reappraisal, I think, could mitigate those components of reduced professional accomplishment and of burnout. So I think in some ways, I believe in this, so I think that those two findings could mitigate the burnout piece. So even though we didn't find significance there. Okay. Thank you. So creating a culture of self-care. So this is some qualitative data from our project self-care. This is still, we were working on this. We have so much qualitative data, and my student team, Tess, Jenna, Krista, and Meg, we were working on this data, and then again, COVID hit and we stopped. But we did get some, and I thought this would be helpful for people who wanted to implement some of this in their schools, right? So what contributed most to the learning? Experiential activities. And Coleman has a study that he did. It was a meta-analysis, and he looked at all of these self-care studies teaching students self-care. And one of the things that he found was most effective was, you don't tell somebody, okay, you're going to do mindfulness or you're going to do yoga. He said, and this is what I found as well, you want people to find their own. You want people to find what resonates with them, because they're not going to do it if it doesn't appeal to them, if it doesn't resonate with them. And so those experiential activities, lots of different strategies that they were able to try during the workshop, that's what contributed to many of their to their learning. And then the concrete tools and resources, and Stacy, that's what I have added at the end. And so I think that that's good. I'd love to go over those, because when I started practicing mindfulness, there was nothing. And now there's, you know, you put in mindfulness or you put in self-care, and there's so many resources that you can look at and use and share. And then sharing and listening to experiences of others, like almost 20% of the participants mentioned that. And then instructor presentation format, which was very informal, a lot of discussion, and then the research, the benefits. So those are some of the things that the participants took away. Other suggestions that they made were weekly reminders, because in between workshop 1 and workshop 2, I sent weekly email reminders. Why don't you keep a gratitude journal this week and see how it goes? You know, read this blog from Rick Hansen. It talks about the freedom not to, you know, so I gave these weekly reminders, and there were a lot of participants that wanted me to keep doing it, you know, even after the workshops were over. But I suggested that they do that for each other. And then self-care accountability partners. These are some of the things that I think people could easily do in schools. I do mindfulness before my staff meetings. I have a whole list of mindfulness meditations that are online that I've gathered together. You can easily do that. I do that in my program meetings, my department meetings, my faculty meetings. And then modeling, having people just create this culture of self-care. And again, one size doesn't fit all. So those are some findings from my data. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of what I did in my workshops. So again, people, it's not, some of it's brain science, but it's not brain science in putting together the experiences for people to start practicing. So you can advance the slide, Stacy. So these are some of the strategies that we go over in my workshops. And I'm just going to give you a flavor of what that is so that you can see one size doesn't fit all. I don't say, okay, everybody should do this or everybody should do that. One of the things that I do is I have worksheets that the participants fill out. And the first one is talk about identify your chronic stressors, and then star the ones that you have control over. And then be very cognizant as we go through all these strategies of what might address the stressors, that what might alleviate those stressors in particular. Because you have to choose strategies that you're going to actually do, right? So, okay, so you can advance the slide. So the first thing that we do, and I've talked quite a bit about mindfulness, is mindfulness, and there are different anchors. And we did a little mindfulness exercise in the very beginning. But throughout these slides, what you'll see are two things. I have two goals. One is to have participants experience the different practices so they can see how it feels to them and whether they like it or not. And then write down, everyone's taking notes, write down what you prefer, what feels good, what do you think will address, you know, if you say that you're hypercritical, you know, what's going to keep you more positive, because you can actually change the neural pathways of positivity from negative to positive in your brain because of that neuroscience. Or if you have a problem with boundaries, which, you know, I'd say like 98% of participants have problems with boundaries, then figure out which strategies are going to help you with that. So for those of you who, I think everyone knows mindfulness now, but mindfulness that's defined by John Kabat-Zinn is the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experiences moment by moment. So that non-judgmentally piece is really important. And as I said, since we've gotten this neurotechnology, we have so much more research that correlates mindfulness with a host of great benefits. And one is better self-compassion, self and other compassion. And I think that non-judgmental piece is really very instrumental in that outcome. So again, I think the mindfulness is sort of the self-care that keeps on giving, because it actually changes the structure of your brain. So it's like going into the gym and lifting weights, doing some bicep curls. And then when you're out, and you have a fall, or if you're out and you have to carry something, you have that strength there. It's not that you're doing it in the moment. It's there in preparation for whatever's coming. And that's the way mindfulness is. You practice it, and then you have it in your back pocket when you're in a stressor, or you have a strong emotional trigger, and you can stay at baseline without having to, react. You can choose how to respond if you built up your mindfulness muscle in your brain. So the one thing that I really try to hit home with participants is that self-care doesn't have to add to your to-do list. So mindfulness, there are two types of mindfulness. There's formal mindfulness, where you take time out of your day, you sit and you are anchored according to your breath, or according to sound, or whatever anchor you choose, you take time out and you do that. But then there's informal mindfulness. And the great thing is now that they're finding that you get the same benefits from informal mindfulness. And so informal mindfulness would be bringing your full attention to showering, so you're there and you're in your shower, and you're feeling the hot water, and you're smelling the special shower gel that you bought just for that occasion. And I brush my teeth in the shower. So it's taste, it's smell, it's feel, it's sound, it's sight. So it's a deep mindfulness experience. You have to shower anyway. Everyone has to shower, right? So if you're not in the shower making lists or figuring out what you're going to do or what you're going to wear, you're off. If you're actually there in the moment, that's mindfulness, and you get the same benefits. Another way, since I went through my training, I rarely practice mindfulness except in the beginning of class. That's only setting aside time for mindfulness. I also drive mindfully. And so 25 minutes to work, 25 minutes back, I'm anchored, sight, sound, sometimes smell when I go past the chimneys in Bridgeport. And so I'm there. And so that's 50 minutes of mindfulness there and back. So there are ways that you can practice mindfulness without having to add to your to-do list. Another one is eating mindfully. You have to eat. If you do it really, tasting your food, smelling your food, and it doesn't have to be your whole lunch, it could be an apple, but you have to do it anyway. So that doesn't add to your to-do list. And the benefits, you can advance the screen. The benefits are astronomical. And I just picked out some benefits that relate directly to stress and burnout. And educators' mindfulness is one aspect of social emotional competence that may protect them from experiencing burnout and its negative effects. The protective effect of mindfulness was most pronounced amongst the most stressed and more ambitious educators. Okay, so there is research that says that mindfulness can combat stress and burnout. And it's intuitive, but it's always nice to have the data, right? You have to have the data. Okay, you can advance, Stacy. Okay, so mindful gratitude. We as human beings are we are slanted toward the negative. And that was a survival instinct for us. That's built into us because we needed to be scanning the world for danger in order to survive as a species. So we really lean negative. But the good news is, because of neuroplasticity, we can rewire our brains to be more positive. And developing a habit of mindful gratitude has us scanning the world for positives, things that we're grateful for. And so you can do that with a gratitude journal. You can do that by writing gratitude letters. You can do that. There are so many different ways to do that. And again, you are rewiring your brain to be more positive. And so a lot of it, I think a lot of the mindfulness and the self-care that I have come to understand and to conceptualize has more to do with how we view things. So if you advance the slide, these are the gratitude outcomes. So again, in my workshops, I give people an opportunity to practice the different strategies, and then I show them the research outcomes. And then also I ask them, on your list of stressors, your chronic stressors, is there anxiety and depression? Maybe you want to practice gratitude. If you have a hard time letting go or forgiving people, maybe you want to practice gratitude. So again, it's not one size fits all, and we want to customize our self-care, because then we have the best chance of practicing it, right? If it's gonna serve us in our specific circumstances. Okay, you can advance. Okay, so reducing perceptions of busyness. This is people always perk up for this one. And there is research that says that busyness is indicative of cognitive overload. And I think we can probably, as school psychologists, all relate to this, but it inhibits our executive functioning. So we're not at peak when we're so busy. So one of the things that there's been research on is awe. And that's a really interesting line of research. And so to be awe-inspired, and I'll show like a little video to show people that, how did you feel with that? Oh, that was so awe-inspiring. And so what that does is it makes you feel small compared to what else is happening in other people's situations and the vastness of the world in my little corner. Things, small feelings, small problems. My problems aren't as big as other people's. So that's awe. Another way to reduce perceptions of busyness is to create a flow. And I always hear people kind of gasp when I talk about this, because multitasking, I think we wear that as a badge of honor. And there's been research that actually shows if you get interrupted, if you're doing something like writing a report or scoring a protocol or writing up your counseling notes, and you have an open door policy and you allow people to come in whenever they want, and they come in, it will take you up to 20 minutes to get back to where you were. So even if they stop in for 2 minutes, to get back to what you were doing, it could take like 20 minutes. And so putting do not disturb or come back in 10 minutes sign on your door, that could save you a lot of time. That's part of those boundaries. And then rituals, any kind of ritual, if you do it enough time, it gets out of your prefrontal cortex and into your basal ganglia and becomes automatic. And so an example of that is, for me, I had both of my hips replaced, and I had some hip exercises I was given to do, and I would always forget to do them. And so I wasn't getting I wasn't getting better. And then I started doing them before I got out of bed. So I'd open my eyes, I'd roll over, and I'd start doing my hip exercises. So that's an example of a ritual that I do. I do it now religiously. I am great to walk, to run, to do whatever, because I did my exercises. But it's automatic now, and I don't have to worry about doing it later. So that's an example, you know, and I have a worksheet that we use in the workshop that helps people to come up with that. So you can advance, and we can see the great outcomes that practicing awe can give us: less busy, positive emotions, happier, more generous, you know, lots of really good things. And awe is also kind of a state of mind too, you know, really being connected with what's happening that is really just amazing, and just being and feeling in your body how amazing something is, how awesome something is. Okay. All right, so this is one of the things that I love, and there are some times, and I know during the year, during the seasons of life, where you just don't have any time, right, to do anything extra. And so in my workshop, I have a what brings you joy worksheet, and people fill out what brings you joy, and then I'll say, okay, so what on your list can you just put in your office, or in your workspace, or where you live? You know, these are some of the things that I have pictures. That's my niece over there in her power stance. You know, I get in my office. This is another one of my rituals. I get in my office, I turn on my essential oil diffuser, and then I turn on my Pandora radio, old jazz, and that's my self-care in the background. And every so often I'll take a break, I'll smell my diffuser, I'll listen to the jazz, and then I'm back at work. It doesn't take any time, it's there. And it just has such an impact on my psyche when I come in, and I just feel like my whole being just decompresses. And that's self-care, you know, that's self-care. It doesn't have to be a big thing. So, you know, even during the really busy seasons, just with an adjustment in our self-care expectations, we can surround ourselves with things that bring us joy and develop a habit of dwelling in the positive, you know, even if it's just for a few seconds. Okay, so you can advance. So really coming full circle, and this is something that I have discovered through my research, is self-care is a mindset. You know, I've really learned from it that you don't, it's more how you think about it than what you necessarily do. So I have this one quote from Rick Hansen that says, whatever we repeatedly sense and feel and want and think is slowly but surely sculpting our neural structure. So isn't that cool? I mean, if we surround ourselves with all the positives, a lot of us, you know, we get in a rut and we go down that rabbit hole, and it's and just really focusing on the negative. Whereas if we flip that and focused on the positive, that's self-care, you know, because what we're doing is we're really sculpting our brains to get to the positive more quickly, more readily, and more automatically eventually. So, okay. So, case in point, you know, it's the same size glass, the same amount of fluid. Are you gonna choose to see it as half full or half empty? And so with the mindfulness and some of the self-care, you can shift to the more half full. And that's, you know, that's the way I want to live. I want to live more viewing the glass as half full. So it is a choice. All right. So you can, all right. So these are some more recent takeaways that I've had from my students, the research, my workshop participants. And so self-care requires a recognition that it's not selfish. It's a quality of life imperative, you know, and when I first started giving my self-care workshops, I was like, oh, okay, everybody's going to come out with a self-care plan at the end, and they're going to practice it on Monday morning. And I think that there's probably 5% of my workshop participants that even touch the work, the self-care plan. But the one thing that 99.9% of them in my qualitative evaluation, they say their biggest takeaway that is self-care is not selfish. And, hey, if if you come away with that, then that's the beginning. So the recognition that self-care is not selfish. Second, an intention to commit to practicing. Make a plan, and you'll see on the next slide, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Doesn't have to be big, but just that intention is super important. It's that proactive piece. Don't wait until you're flat on your back, or you have to take a mental health day because you really need to take a mental health day. Take a mental health day and go shopping. That would be better. And then the second is self-awareness, and all of this, my major goal in my workshops is really, and with my students, is to develop that self-awareness, to be able to check in wherever you are and figure out what you need in that moment. And I'm talking, okay, what do I need in this moment? I need to go to the bathroom because it's 3 o'clock and I've had to go since 10. And now I have a little window of opportunity. I'm going to go. So that's not a big thing. That's not Hawaii. That's comfort. That's base comfort. And then the last thing is experiencing practices fully with all of your senses to burn new neural pathways of positivity and peace. And that's where the mindfulness component comes in. And again, it doesn't have to be taking time out. You're not oming on a mountain for 45 minutes. You're just driving mindfully. You're showering mindfully. You're cooking mindfully. You're folding clothes mindfully. You're working out. And many people will do that. If you're in the gym and you're lifting weights, you may be lifting them mindfully because you're there in the moment. You're feeling your muscle. You're looking at yourself and your form in the mirror. So it's really that deep sensory experience that really then shapes our brains, and what we repeatedly sense and feel and want and think is slowly but surely molding our brains toward that positive or that happy or that peaceful, whatever it is. Okay, so you can move it to the next slide. Okay, so I couldn't resist framing self-care in a triangle. Some people will groan when they see this, but I think it really helps. I was showing it to my students. It really helps kind of put it into perspective, because there's big self-care. That's tier 3, big self-care. So it's kind of, it's not the same as SRBI or RTI. But tier 3 happens once in a while. It's self-care that requires more resources, time, or money. It's going to Hawaii, right? Or visiting friends and family out of state, or spending an hour talking to my friend in California who I keep putting off, but I really want to catch up to her. I just don't have an hour right now. So those things, those pie in the sky things. And I think those are some of the things that people say, I don't have time for that. That's what they think of, that self-care, or even tier 2. But tier 2 is weekly self-care, practice regularly, maybe 3 to 4 times a week, like on mine. Yoga with Adrienne, and I do some yoga with Adrienne in my workshops. I love Adrienne. Free YouTube yoga. You could do it for 12 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever fits into your day. So these are some of the things that I do at least once a week, like walk on Walnut Beach on Sundays to Bee's Knees for breakfast with my daughter. Things that you can do weekly, more than once a week. That's tier 2. Then tier 1 are daily self-care choices. multiple times a day. You know, I read my Bible chapter every morning before I get out of bed, after I do my hip exercises. Sleeping 7 to 8 hours a day. These are the things that people think, you know, I don't know that people necessarily think this is self-care, but if you start thinking that way, this is me taking care of myself, eating at least 2 meals a day, walking my dog twice a day, you know. But then, especially now at the bottom, practicing gratitude and self-compassion, self-advocating, setting boundaries. That's one of my big self-cares. I decided I set a self-care goal where I have a list of my priorities. And I was a people pleaser. I would say, what do you want me to do? Sure, I'll do it. I'll do it 5 times, you know, just tell me. And I have my priorities now. And when somebody asks me to do something that's not already on my plate, I will say, let me get back to you. And then I'll look and see, okay, does it line up with my priorities? And if it does, I'll think about it a little more and maybe I'll take it on. Like chairing the Connecticut School Safety and Crisis Response Committee. I thought that really aligns with my priorities. So I did that 3 years ago. But other things I've said, no, it doesn't fit. And so I say no. And that has been a game changer for me. So yeah, so these are things that, you know, tier 1, they should happen every day. And I think it's more people do these things, but they don't necessarily consider it self-care. Drinking 90 ounces of water a day, you know. So I just wanted to put this out there to kind of help people gain perspective on self-care and what it is and what it requires to do. And a lot of it is just changing your attitude, changing your mind. So I will close my slides or at least the slides where I have content on. These are students, these are my interns. They're required to turn in a reflection a week, and they can write on anything. And so I always have them write on self-care. They choose to write on self-care, you know. And so I'm just going to read the one on the bottom because I love it. Before this program, I valued the opposite of self-care. I was definitely the kind of person who wore burnout and injury as a badge of honor, signifying hard work. Anybody relate to that? Looking back, I recognize how sick those feelings were, but only because you taught me a better way to live and treat myself. So these are kind of, you know, they help me to feel like I'm on the right track. And then I'm just going to read one that one of my students from last year left. And it really kind of ties it all together, I think. And this is an excerpt. We've built our own foundations of self-care. So now it's second nature, in my opinion. Makes it easier for us to identify that the small things we do each day, listening to our favorite music or podcast while driving, taking deep breaths, reflecting and expressing gratitude, exercising, yoga, are all examples of self-care that many people don't recognize as self-care. Because we're able to recognize that, it makes it easier and more realistic for us to stick to a self-care plan and feel good about self-care. You taught us that we don't have to make time for self-care. It should be embedded into our daily routine. So that's, you know, but I have to say that my students, so these are interns, so they've had the weekly reminders for 3 years. So, you know, but it does, I've been very gratified by their acceptance. And I'll just say last year, I had students who were doing self-care newsletters as interns in their districts, doing self-care PDs in their districts, you know, having Wellness Wednesday in their districts. So they're taking it out, and actually those are some of the things that could be done, right? That we talked a little bit about. Okay, you can advance to the, okay, so resources. So is this the one that you didn't know about, Stacy, The Science of the Greater Good. Oh my gosh, this is my alma mater, Berkeley, and they have the best blogs where they have research. It's all so positive psychology. It's just like it says here, groundbreaking scientific discoveries. And then they have the Greater Good in Action, where you can go and they have activities, they have meditations, they have different things that you can do with kids. They have they speak to parents, they speak to teachers, they speak to everyone. It's and it's free. It's a free website. Just One Thing newsletter, that's by Rick Hansen, and he puts something out every week, like the weekly reminder. So you can find, if you follow that you can, a simple practice each week. And he's also got a book called 30 Little Things. And then these are just free websites. UCLA, that was one of the first websites that gave you free mindful meditations, that you can go there. And again, they have 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 19 minutes for sleep, meditation for sleep, if you have a problem with that. Smiling Mind has, again, free, out of Australia. They have modules for 3 to 5 year olds, 6 to 7 year olds, 8 to 9 year olds, all the way up to the 17, 18 year olds, and then adults, and then mindfulness in the workplace and mindfulness for sports. And it's all free. It's amazing. So they have the meditations, they have the different activities, and then calm.com, that's not free. But I think people know calm.com. And then Yoga with Adrienne. I had to put Adrienne on there because she's my girl.
So, Paul, before I tell some of the other NASP resources, I've been sitting here laughing because, you just know you're not at a school psych presentation until you see a triangle at least once. So I was really proud of you for being able to work a triangle into the presentation.
Didn't want to let you down.
Yeah. I just don't feel like it's a school psych presentation without it. So I want to just remind people that we have a lot of NASP resources too. We do have the COVID-19 Resource Center. And with all of these webinars, there is a guidance document that will accompany this webinar also. It'll be posted on our website, and these are just a summary document for you. In the event that you don't have the time to actually watch or listen to an entire podcast or webinar, you can still get the gist of these ideas through some of the guidance documents that we've put together. And we did have a previous webinar on care for the caregivers that was specific to that you might be interested in following up with as well if you're listening to this today. And then there is a whole part of our website that's dedicated to self-care resources for school psychologists. And so we encourage people to take a look at that as well. So I'm going to open it up now for some questions and for some considerations around that. And I'll turn it over to Kathy Cowan and let her begin. Kath, what are some questions that came to mind for you while you were listening to Paula talk?
Well, first of all, it was really reinforcing to be reminded that small steps, small things over time and cumulatively can make a big difference, because most of us can't do big things, no matter what it is. And that those small things that you can do, like one of my very favorite fables is the starfish fable, because particularly for people who are in a caregiver mode, you want to fix everything and everyone and be there for everything and everyone. That really isn't possible. But reminding ourselves that doing what we can is going to make a difference for somebody. And in this particular case, the small things you can integrate into your day can actually make a big difference for you to build our capacity to continue to make a difference for others. So that was extraordinarily reinforcing. But one of the things that I know we're hearing a lot about and feeling, and at the glass half full, half empty, I think a lot of people right now feel like the table is shaking like this, and they're not worried about whether they're half empty or half full. They're just trying not to fall off the table and break, because the systems are stressed in total and are very frayed. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit how while staying very centered on what you do have control over within your own world and your own life, to start building those capacities, rewiring your brain to be more resilient in systems that need that same process, and what role school psychologists can, again, maybe in small steps, begin to change the fabric of the system because it's very hard when you're going like this to figure out whether or not you're half full or half empty. You just don't want to be broken.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it goes back and what I've been talking with people a lot, and that's one of the reasons I really like. I did my first in-person workshop last week since COVID, since we closed down. And I really loved it because I get to really talk to people, and it was a really nice size. And these were the nurses, and they were reiterating, you know, they feel the same way. They have kids who they're contact tracing, and they're not in, and they have to wait until they come back. And so, you know, and I think that that's the way everyone's feeling. My students are feeling the same way. And I think it's really important to set boundaries. And I know that, you know, we want it, like you said, we want to fix it, everything for everyone. But if you're broken, you're not going to be fixing anything. And so we were talking about boundaries, and the head nurse, if you will, she said, I'll share. She said, I had a call. I'm running around trying to fix the PD day. It was election day, PD day, lunch, everything. She got a call from her superintendent. And he said, I'm meeting with the governor on Thursday, and I need some talking points, you know, within the next half hour. and she said, I never do this, but I told him I'm busy with PD and I have all these things, and I will, you know, send you something tonight. And to her complete amazement, he said, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I will take a stab at it and I'll send them over to you to review. And so I've heard that, not in the same exact way, but I've heard that people are at their breaking point and they never say no, and they never push back, and they're starting to, and to their amazement, they're being heard, you know. And that doesn't always, you know, that's not always the case, but I think that, and I say to my students, if I don't hear from you, if I don't get a question, or I don't get asked for clarification, I think everything's fine. And I think in schools, we're so used to just doing what we do and fitting it in and staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning. But I think it's really important to push back. So that's one of the things that I would say. I've been talking with people a lot about boundaries, and I'm terrible at boundaries, but that's something that I have been employing, and it's really been a game changer for me. Because I think that we're all in it together, you know, people in schools, and the table shaking. If we all say, okay, let's take a side of the table and make sure that it's on steady. I think there has to be, like I said, there has to be a recognition that this is important. And I think people have to say, wait a minute, we can't do what we've always done. You know, we can't do what we've always done. And I know that there are deadlines, and I know that there are, you know, PPTs and things that people have to do. But so those are the things that we have to do. But everything else, we just really can't conduct business as usual. And it's scary, and it's hard, and people we're not of that ilk, you know. But I think, and so that part, that's the outward part. And then when you are able to come in your room and close the door, just have it be a sanctuary, you know, a sanctuary. And I know people don't close their doors, but just have it be a sanctuary with, you know, and I know people do this. I know my students do with positive affirmations, and almost all of my students have EO diffusers that they use. And, soft music, but nurturing ourselves is so important. And then asking, can we do a minute of mindfulness at our faculty meeting on Wednesdays after school? It's 1 minute, and you don't have to do anything but press the button play, so that people start understanding that this is important and start feeling, some of the, when I ask people to find a word that describes, some people are like, oh my gosh, I was frazzled and now I'm serene. And that was like less than a minute, so there are really little things that we can do, but I know it's really hard. So it's stuff that we can do for ourselves, and then stuff that we can do with others, and then stuff we have to push back on and get the administrators. And that's why I'm so excited about presenting to the principals in a few weeks, because they're the ones who really have the power to sanction it, to make it a system-wide thing. But I think that school psychologists have probably more power than they've ever used.
Well, it's interesting because I know we were talking a little bit earlier about the fact that we are where we are. We're in this certain context right now, and it can feel very overwhelming. But within that, and this goes to the glass half full piece of it, I guess, within that is real opportunity for change, because people are open for solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing maybe on, this is a solution to this is a positive step in helping
Mm-hmm.
schools cope with everything it has to do, is to reinforce this, because we're strengthening the system just like we're strengthening the individuals.
Right.
Maybe a way to think about
Mm-hmm.
why it's worth trying to take those small advocacy steps to get your administrators to buy into that 1 minute at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the other, maybe putting together some time for PLCs or something for that mentoring
Mm-hmm.
support. But
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so much research, going to your principal with the research, but you're right, we're off kilter. The table is moving and the system is moving, and that's the time that change is easiest, so that's finding the silver linings and then jumping on them. Yeah, that was good.
So I'm going to jump in just with a couple comments, and then just one final question. I wanted to note one of the things that really stood out for me today was your conversation about self-care is really a planful versus an impulsive act. You sort of talked about that throughout your presentation in little bits and pieces, and it's just something that for me really resonated from the standpoint of even the informal things that you do, like taking that time in the car, or that you have to be conscious about that. And it made me think about, like, as school psychologists, maybe one of the things that we can give back to our communities in doing this is to be that prompt for our faculties each week, to take a moment and to do this, to put this, for those people who are social media users, putting that out on social media, just making a commitment for that to be a once a week kind of thing, that you you share your prompt for people. I could really hear the value in that for your students and for me. And I know for myself, people who know me know I love cooking. And so even at a very end of a very, very busy day, I will still step into the kitchen and put something together, even if it only takes me, if it's a 30-minute meal versus a 3-hour meal. I will do that because it really is a healthy experience for me. And that's something that I plan for. I plan for it every week when I do my grocery lists and my planning meals and everything. And it's just something that I really enjoy. So I love that about your message. And I just wanted to reiterate how important I think that is in listening to you. I had one small question too. this is a funny thing, but I noticed on one of your slides, you talked about the self-care accountability partners. And immediately in my mind, I thought, hey, is that my Friday afternoon golfing club that I'm in? Or is it something that's a little bit more formal than that? And I'm just wondering if you could just talk to that idea a little bit more about the accountability partners and who those people are and how formal or informal that really needs to be.
Yeah, sure. And I want to really validate your cooking. And I just want to challenge you. Do you fully immerse yourself? Are you smelling and tasting?
Everything. I'm a freak about it.
Perfect.
I'm freakish. Yeah.
That's
and
a
you should
deep sensory.
Go out to dinner with me sometime and it will bore you to death if you're not into your food. But I have that ability to kind of deconstruct things that I'm eating, and I love doing that. I love really getting into the food. So yeah, I'm all about it. So it's quite a messy experience though at the end of the night.
Yeah, but that's
all part of it too. So.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of the customization, you know, what resonates with you.
Yeah.
And I'll take you up on that in Boston.
Yeah, love to have you.
Yeah, I think the accountability partners, they can be anything. So if it's your ongoing golf, you know, date on Friday afternoon, yes, because if you decide, oh, maybe I won't do that, maybe I'll do something else, there'll be somebody that says, oh, come on, Stacy.
Yeah.
Come on, this is what we do. Come on, don't be a, you know, like for me, my daughter, we go every Sunday, and I couldn't go because I was in Vermont yesterday, but every Sunday for 2 hours. And my mom is 93 years old, and she lives in an apartment in my basement, and I sleep down there every night. So my window of, you know, my self-care has gotten very small, but that's something that I look forward to every week. And it, you know, and so I know that she's expecting me to, you know, so if there's somebody there that's expecting you that you do something with it, it could be, you know, people who go shopping together, or, you know, or people who are going to eat their apples mindfully. They're going to be people who say, okay, yes, we're going to commit to having lunch. You know, maybe we're going to commit to having lunch on Thursdays. And then if you, for some reason, don't want to do it, there's somebody else that cheers you on, you know, that holds you accountable. No, we said we were going to do this, you know, or even separately, you know, this is my plan. It's very simple, you know, this is, and somebody shares their plan with you, and then you check in with them on it. Yeah. You know, but I think, and one of the things that I say is always have something to look forward to. You know, always have something to look forward to, even if it's watching Hocus Pocus, you know, the Saturday before Halloween, you know, whatever it is, just have something that gets you through, you know, gets you through the week, gets you through the challenges, gets you through the times where you're low energy and you're leaning toward watching the glass empty, you know.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Well, I think we could sit here and talk for the rest of the day. I assume that would start to infringe on our other people's need for us to get back to our work, though. So I'm going to say thank you so much, Paula, for joining us today and for sharing your expertise. And I'll remind our listeners that, as with each of our webinars, we have included direct links to the documents and the resources we think will be helpful to you in the PowerPoints, and we will post the PowerPoints with the webinars so that you can just download those to your computer and then open up those resources. And we invite you to join our NAS member exchange thread on this topic, and that will be opened after this webinar is posted. So thank you again to everybody for listening to this webinar. Thank you, Paula, for your time. Thank you, Kathy, for your reflections as well. And we wish you all a great day. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you for getting the word out.
Thanks.